Welcome to week 2 here at George Washington University's Masters in Homeland Security program for the Political Violence and Terrorism, PSHS 6240. Welcome to week 2, and for a couple of you who are kind of late coming in, welcome to the course. We have one or two people who registered late, so I just want to welcome you guys to the course and the program. So start off with announcements. Adobe Connect session, I should say a WebEx session, is 25 January at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's a Thursday, 25 January, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Group 1 will brief, and you guys know who you are in Group 1. If you don't, please check the roster. Everyone else, it's optional. So if you're but it's also probably a good time if you want to talk to me about office hours, about the course, or if you want to just listen into a group that is presenting on a topic that you have to write a paper on. So again, I highly encourage you to go, but it's optional if you can't. For Group 1, I expect the presentation to be about 20 to 25 minutes, and that leaves 5 to 10 minutes for questions or if issues come up. How it will work is you'll get a WebEx link with a password, and WebEx is just a interactive PowerPoint or interactive video teleconference platform where it's very easy to use, very easy to talk to people across it. You'll give me the slides. Make sure it's a PowerPoint presentation. Make sure you give it to me beforehand so I can upload it into WebEx. So that's, again, 25 January at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For the rest of you, Paper 1 is due 28 January at 11:59 p.m. So that's a Sunday on Topic 1. So just keep those dates in the back of your head. And what I will say is Paper 1 has a lot to do with what we're doing this upcoming week. So the more you interact with your classmates, the more you go into the readings in depth, the more that you analyze your fellow classmates' work and allow that to impact your thinking patterns, the better you'll do on the paper. So just keep that in mind as we go from here on in. Keep up the effort. As always, a lot of times these courses are, everyone puts their effort in at the beginning and then things go downhill as the course goes on. If you put in the effort that you put in this past week, this course will go fine. So again, please keep the posts as they are. Keep interacting with your fellow classmates. It'll get harder and there'll be more work as we go on, but I ask that you keep up the effort. So videos, with the exception of one day in September, the rest of the videos for this course are all online. This coming week, Netflix, the 70s is on Netflix, or CNN, the 70s is on Netflix. You'll have a bunch of videos from week 3, week 4, and week 6. Those are all online on YouTube. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to buy anything with the exception of one day in September. If you had a hard time getting one day in September, please let me know. If you couldn't get it via Amazon, eBay, or any of the other major shopping sites, please let me know as well, because it is due. I want you to watch it in this upcoming week. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And then next, current events. I do want to bring up current events in these YouTube lectures. What's dominating the news is President Trump's reportedly offhanded remarks about other countries. I don't want to get this course to be political, and I certainly don't want this course to focus on what President Trump tweets out or what he says one way or another. But I just want to focus on this for a second. First, again, if it's true, and I have all reason to believe it's true, it's it kind of violates the golden rule. First of all, you're not supposed to treat others as you don't want to be treated. But secondly, more reference to you and your future careers. As you progress in your careers, the words you use will have to be more, I don't want to say politically correct, but you have to clean up your language is probably the best way to say this. What you can say as a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain in Baghdad or Afghanistan cannot be said in a policy meeting in Washington, D.C. And I've seen this, and I don't want to sound derisive here, but one word when I was in Iraq, and some of you might have heard this too, you heard the term Haji a lot. And that's probably not a best way to say it. But I've also heard that term used in policy meetings in downtown, the Pentagon, or in downtown D.C. by military officers who are probably just coming from overseas. Modulate your language is what I will just say. What you can say as a lieutenant, you can't say as a mid-level or upper-level government official. And that's all I'll say about that. So, covering week one, again, we had a great discussion. I think we hit all the high points. Some people said terrorism was an existential threat. Other people thought it wasn't. I think most people thought it wasn't. But there was a couple of people, and again, it bases your definition of what an existential threat is. A lot of people brought up the Rwandan genocide. Ironically, we're going to talk about it next week, about when you get to commit violence, when it's terrorism, when is it self-defense, and certainly Rwandan genocide becomes a point where maybe you get to commit violence if you are on the receiving end of that level of oppression. But I will push that till next week. For now, is terrorism an existential threat? A lot of people mention the psychological impact. That it may not be the one explosion that makes you in danger, but it's the second and third and fourth order feeling of violation that is actually the existential threat. And I'll ask, the question is, okay, part of it is done by the terrorists, but part of it is our reaction to it. It's done to ourselves, or we do it to ourselves. And I ask you to think about that as we go forward. Again, and then going on with that, self-inflicted. A lot of the psychological impact is self-inflicted. We do it to ourselves. What can impact our way of life? There's an article out there I just read about authoritarian governments, and that seems to come up in the news a lot. But one of the ironies was, and this article was addressed to people who thought about liberating Iraq back in 2003, or Libya in 2011. And the premise was, being an authoritarian government isn't so bad. You still went about your day-to-day business as if you lived in a democracy. You still went to school, you went to work, you went to you socialized, you had weddings, you had all the things that we have. You did in an authoritarian or even a totalitarian government. For 98% of the people, it was fine. For 2%, it really sucked to live under the authoritarian government. But that did not impact their way of life. And what I mean that is, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, going to school or getting your kids to school, going to work, going to a wedding, doing social things. So the question is, what can impact our way of life? When you're talking about terrorism, we're talking about any other social phenomenon. And then the thing is, I think we had a conversation, and I brought this up as a prompt. What is in our control, or our perception of control? Terrorism, for most part, is out of our control. Yeah, I know a couple of people brought up that if you travel overseas, you can mitigate terrorism by doing certain force protection issues, or how you travel and how you set patterns. But for 98% of people, people certainly that lived in the World Trade Center, or worked in the World Trade Center, or were victims of the shooting in Orlando, or any of the terrorist attacks we've seen in Europe, there's really nothing they could have done. They were just going about their normal business. There's no mitigation factors. That is in opposition to some of the other policy issues that were brought up in the Atlantic article. Vehicular accidents. Yes, they killed 30,000 people, but you can do certain things to reduce your risk of being a victim of a vehicular accident. Heart disease. Certainly you can eat less sugar and meat. Terrorism is something you can't control. And that may be one of the reasons why it does have such a large psychological impact. I'm not going to say it's an existential threat, but it certainly probably should be put in a separate category as those other policy issues relating to health and safety that were discussed in the article. So good discussion this past week. Looking forward to the discussion for the next weeks. So preview, moving to week 2. We're going to talk about history in week 2 a lot. And what you see here are 3 time periods of terrorism. And the one thing to get across is that what makes a terrorist group successful is their ability to get their message across and to use the technology of the day to get their message across. What you see in that first picture here, and it's kind of a little bit hard to see, are 2 British soldiers being hung by the Israeli terrorist group, the Irgun. What the Irgun used was teletype messaging. Back before World War II, if you wanted to get a photograph out in a newspaper, you had to take the photograph, get it developed, mail it, and sometimes you wouldn't see that event until 2-3 weeks later because you had to go through that process. Teletype photography allowed wire services to get photographs immediately. This was one of the great inventions that came out of World War II. That's why on the D-Day photographs, D-Day happens on 6 June. By 7 June, that picture is in every newspaper in the Western world. The Irgun knew this, and they knew to use pictures that you see right here as a way to communicate their message worldwide. And this got them worldwide notoriety. Teletype messaging was kind of the YouTube of the day. It could get instant message to a wide audience. And again, this is in the post-World War II era. The second picture, Black September, when you watch One Day in September, you'll see this more in detail. This was the attack by the Palestinian groups that attacked Black September that targeted the Israeli athletes. The technology they used was the 24-hour news cycle. The 1972 Olympics was the first event where there was color TV, 24-hour news coverage. And they knew they would get a mass audience for their attack. And it worked. It worked. A lot of times, I mentioned terrorism doesn't, one of the myths is that terrorism doesn't work. No, in fact, terrorism works. And in this case, Black September brought massive coverage to the Palestinian cause. Arguably, we would not be talking about an Israel-Palestinian peace process that dominates every U.S. administration. We would not be talking about that if it were not for the use of terrorism, particularly in Munich. So again, terrorism works. And then finally, ISIS. I think everyone's aware of how ISIS uses YouTube and other social media to get their message across. And one of the things that I think is a good quote, I don't know who came up with it, but it's certainly a good quote, that terrorists are branding and marketing companies that occasionally kill people. And that's true. When you think of a business that has to get their message out and that has to market, it's not terribly different than what a terrorist does. So think about that again as we go through week 2 and we look at the history of terrorism, from World War II on to present. So the readings for this week. So the best way to do this is kind of to separate it into 2 categories. The Hoffman is chapters 1 through 4. It's probably good to read the Hoffman chapters 1 through 4, the 4 waves of terrorism, and then the CNN, the 70s, because that gives you a good history of terrorism up to pretty much right to now, to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So go ahead, read that, probably answer the first question in the discussion section, and then come back to the lecture on definitions of terrorism. So maybe reread chapter 1 of Hoffman, which talks about definitions of terrorism. Read the Vox article If you have time, watch the One Day in September. And then what I didn't have listed here is watch the Al Jazeera piece on the IRA and Martin McGuinness. Really only have to watch the first 20 minutes of that. It's 2 parts. The first part is where they talk about definitions of terrorism. And Martin McGuinness, again, you'll see this in the video, he was a guy with blood on his hands that later became a member of parliament. And he doesn't view his actions as terrorists. The guy who, the One Day in September terrorists, they don't view their actions as terrorists. So the question is, what is a terrorist? What isn't? And we're going to have a lot of fun with that. We're going to ask some good questions, and we'll cover that in depth in this week. And the lectures, again, the Terrorism History Part 1, and then what a terrorism is, what isn't terrorism. And we'll go through certain events that have happened and ask, why is it terrorism? Why isn't it terrorism? What should be terrorist and what shouldn't? So I look forward to your discussion sections, and if there's questions or issues, please let me know.